Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. Today, we're diving into another disturbing case. In November 2023, the former Minister of National Economy of Kazakhstan, 44-year-old Kwandyk Bishimbayev, committed a horrific act against his wife, 31-year-old Sultanat Nukhanova. He desperately tried to cover his tracks, attempting to disguise the brutal crime as nothing more than an unfortunate accident. But the case quickly drew massive public attention. The victim's family demanded a completely transparent trial, which has since been closely followed not only across Kazakhstan, but also worldwide. What makes the situation even more striking is that a few years earlier, Bishimbayev had already been convicted for repeatedly taking large-scale bribes. He was sentenced to 10 years behind bars, yet managed to walk free after serving just 1 year. Because of that history, many believed he would again use his wealth and influence to escape serious punishment. His guilt was never in doubt. The real question was how severe his sentence would be. To grasp the full scope of this case, it's essential to examine not only the troubled relationship between the couple, but also their personal backgrounds. We'll also take a closer look at the criminal proceedings, why Bishimbayev demanded a jury trial, and what is known about him and his family. Kwandyk Valikanovich Bishimbayev was born on April 11, 1980, in the Kazakh SSR. He was the eldest of 2 children of Valikan Bishimbayev, a deputy in the Majlis of the 5th Convocation, and his wife Almira Nurlibakova. In the 1990s, Kwandyk's mother became a businesswoman. Before her son's high-profile arrest, she controlled several major companies. But in 2024, she quickly transferred ownership to relatives, ensuring the family retained the assets. Back in 2018, during her son's corruption scandal, she had publicly stepped forward as his defender. When the prosecution asked for a 12-year prison sentence for the defendant, Almira called such a sentence destruction of the personality of her son. Kwandyk grew up together with his younger sister, named Arujan, who was born in 1984. The man received 3 higher educations. He studied at the Kazakh Academy of Management, then earned a degree from Taraz University, and later became a recipient of the Presidential Scholarship Program at George Washington University in the United States. At the age of 26, he defended his PhD thesis in economic sciences. In 2000, Kwandyk started his career as a manager in a bank. He briefly interned at the Ministry of Economy and then held senior positions in large companies for several years before returning to the ministry. In 2016, he himself became the head of the Ministry of Economy, becoming one of the youngest high-ranking officials in Kazakhstan. However, just 8 months later, he was dismissed with a great scandal and found himself in prison on the fact of multiple bribes in especially large amounts. The man was sentenced to 10 years in prison, but was released on parole only a year later. He officially apologized to the then head of state, Nursultan Nazarbayev, and the latter pardoned him. Personal life of Kwandyk Bishimbayev. Before meeting the future victim, the defendant twice entered into official marriages. His first wife was Igarim Raimbakova, whom he married back in 1999, when he was a student. In 2000, the couple had a common son, who was named Al-Iskandar Valikan. But in 2004, this union broke up. In 2006, while serving as an advisor to the Minister of Economy and Budget Planning of the Republic of Kazakhstan, the man married for the second time. This time, his chosen one was Nazim Kakarman Babagulova, with whom he lived in marriage for 14 years. 3 children were born in this union. In 2020, the spouses divorced on the initiative of the woman, who was Sultanat Nukhanova. Sultanat Amangeldinovna Nukhanova was born in 1992, on May 15th, in the city of Pavlodar, located in the northern part of Kazakhstan. She was the youngest of 2 children in the family of businessman Amangeldy Nukhanov and his wife, economist Jumagul. The woman's paternal uncle, Kairat Nukhanov, built a brilliant career in politics headed the Regional Department of Entrepreneurship and Trade, and he was also the head of the cities of Ekibastus and Aksu. As a schoolgirl, little Sultanat became seriously interested in astrology. The girl studied profile literature in detail, made horoscopes and natal charts for her friends and classmates. Surprisingly, but she managed to create fairly accurate predictions which, for the most part, came true. At some point, she decided to turn her hobby into a lifelong endeavor, and success did not take long to come. Nukhanova promoted astrological services in social networks. She conducted personal and online consultations, made short-term and long-term forecasts, helped others in achieving their goals, choosing a profession and spiritual development. The astrologer also gave advice in love affairs, tested people for compatibility, and helped to sort out relationships. It is noteworthy that her clients were exclusively women and girls. Sultanat quickly achieved financial independence. She earned decent money doing what she loved, what she knew, and what brought her pleasure. She gained a large number of followers on social networks. Her services were in great demand, and her consultations were scheduled for several months in advance. She was living the life she dreamed of and always aspired to. A persistent fan. In the spring of 2022, Bishimbayev accidentally stumbled upon Nukhanova's page in one of the popular social networks. He liked the young beauty very much, and he decided to write to her, having thought of nothing better than to sign up to her for astrological consultation. However, she turned him down, pointing out that she only provides services to women, but such a turn only fueled the man's interest. The politician persistently tried to get the attention of the charming shade, showered her with compliments, and even tried to pity her, convincing her that only she can help him, and only she is trusted as a specialist astrologer. Sultanat was flattered by this, but still, she stubbornly refused to meet with an obsessive man who was unpleasant and even irritating to her. Repeatedly, the astrologer offered him an online consultation, but the man was adamant. For several months, the politician did not leave attempts to ask the beauty on a date. During this time, he managed to find out almost everything about her: where she lives, with whom she communicates, where she goes, what she is fond of, and so on. Sultanat still refused to meet him, but told her friends that she had a certain persistent admirer. Eventually, Sultanat gave in and agreed to a business meeting for face-to-face counseling. The man made every effort to make a good impression on her, was polite, behaved correctly and courteously, but that first meeting was just the beginning. However, in a frank conversation with her brother, Sultanat claimed that this man was not her type, and they will definitely not work out. At first, the behavior of the ex-minister did not cause much concern to either Sultanat herself or her relatives. She was sure that she could keep her boyfriend at a distance, and relatives and friends knew that this strong and self-sufficient young lady could not be forced to do anything against her will. But in another month, the situation began to change rapidly. Kwandyk managed to literally find a gap in the armor of the beauty, getting close to her through the oldest member of the family. The man expressed a desire to talk to the grandmother of his chosen one and ask for her blessing, motivated by the fact that if ever Sultanat changes her mind and agrees to become his wife, with her parents he will have time to talk, but the grandmother may no longer be. Without exaggeration, we can say that this gesture touched Sultanat, but she still refused to have a relationship with the politician. Unexpected wedding. In the fall of 2022, Sultanat visited the house of her parents in Pavlodar and talked about the fact that so far in her personal life, no serious changes are not expected. She confessed to her brother that she was confused by the big age difference with Bishimbayev, which amounted to 12 years, that she was not attracted to him as a man at all, and according to the astrological calculations she made, they were not compatible at all. However, less than a month after that visit, Aitbek, leafing through his social network newsfeed, came across a post in which his sister wrote that Kwandyk had officially proposed to her and she had gladly accepted. Such news, to put it mildly, shocked the whole family, because it was a complete surprise. Friends of the woman were surprised, no less, because recently she also told them that this is not the hero of her novel, and nothing serious will not work out. Already in December 2022, just a few months after meeting, the couple planned a luxurious wedding, organizing an expensive banquet in one of the most popular establishments in Astana. It is noteworthy that this marriage was not officially registered. The young people limited themselves to a special marriage rite performed in a mosque, but did not register their union in the registry office, and therefore they were considered civil spouses. At that time, Sultanat's attitude towards her chosen one changed dramatically. She constantly told her friends about how smart, educated, well-read, and erudite he was, how he could easily and casually support a conversation on any topic. She also categorically denied his guilt in that high-profile corruption case for which he was imprisoned, albeit briefly. She claimed that he had been framed, and the man was in prison for someone else's crime. From the outside, the couple looked happy. The husband presented his beloved with gifts, and she called him the most golden husband, and claimed that she would never regret her decision to link her fate with him. Friends envied and sincerely rejoiced for the woman, believing that she was very lucky, but it did not last long. The first alarming signal. After the wedding, the newlyweds moved to live in the house of the parents of the spouse. Parents occupied the first floor, and the son and daughter-in-law settled on the second floor. Almira tried to surround her son's chosen one with love and care, often made her gifts, shielded her from routine housework, but she could not protect her from her son. Sultanat periodically came to visit her parents with her husband, but did not invite them to her home, because it irritated Bishimbayev and provoked quarrels. At first, none of her relatives knew about it, but less than a month after the wedding on New Year's Eve, Kwandyk came to visit his sister and witnessed a terrible scene. A large festive table was set in the house, but the banquet was to be held in a small family circle, so when Kwandyk's cousin Kwandyk and his wife came to them and brought gifts to all family members, Sultanat did not have a return gift, which embarrassed her very much. But she quickly found a way out of the awkward situation, deciding to give the woman a bottle of expensive perfume, which the day before her husband bought her, but she had not yet had time to open it. However, her act did not just displease her spouse, but literally infuriated him. The man began to shout that she had no right to give the thing bought with his money, began to insult and call his wife names. The guests, seeing the heated situation, hurried to leave the house, and the parents, who tried to stand up for their daughter-in-law, were rudely stopped. To top it all off, the former politician, in a rage, overturned the table with all the treats and drinks on it, finally spoiling the New Year's Eve party. Kwandyk was shocked by what he saw and did not know how to react. And the next day, in a telephone conversation, his sister confessed to him that her husband's behavior had changed a lot after the wedding, and she did not know what the reason was, but she hoped that the crisis would pass and everything would get better. Her brother suggested that she return home and break off the relationship, to which Sultanat replied with a categorical refusal. Sophisticated domestic tyrant. 2.5 months after the incident, Sultanat Nukhanova unexpectedly sent her brother some selfies. On them, she imprinted her face with terrible bruises and asked not to question her about anything. But the alarmed man tried to contact his sister, but she did not pick up the phone. So he called her husband, who offered to meet him for a man-to-man talk. At the meeting, Kwandyk only told his wife's brother to mind his own business and refused to explain anything about the bruises on the woman's face. He also could not answer where she was, which gave him the most unpleasant thoughts. Fortunately, however, Sultanat was found in her parents' country apartment, to which she had the keys. Soon Sultanat, despite the entreaties of loved ones, returned to her husband, arguing that she loved him and would do anything to save the marriage. For some time, the spouse behaved impeccably, gave her beloved gifts, and promised that he would change for her sake. They even went on a trip together to a popular Maldivian resort, and looked very happy. However, later the photos from that vacation were admitted into evidence in court, because there are clearly visible bruises on the woman's body and fingerprints on her wrists, as if she was roughly grabbed by hands. According to Eitbek, neither to him nor to his parents, his sister has not complained about problems in the marriage since then, although her behavior and changes in appearance spoke for themselves. She lost a lot of weight, withdrew into herself, and began to wear more revealing outfits that apparently helped to hide the bruises and abrasions on her body. Moreover, the once successful astrologer and popular blogger stopped holding appointments and even giving online consultations. In social networks, she published only joint photos with her husband, telling how lucky she was and how much they love each other. As it later turned out, the husband simply forbade his wife to do what she loved, thus depriving her of a source of income, so that she was completely dependent on him. He also took control of all her movements and contacts. She could not meet with her friends without his permission, could not have lunch in a cafe without him. Even calls and messages on her phone were checked. Sultanat appeared everywhere only with Kwandyk, who behaved in public as a loving and caring husband. Most of her friends had no idea about the horrors going on at home, and even envied such a family idol. From the outside, the union really looked flawless. Once a young woman, in a frank conversation, confessed to a close friend that she was subjected to total control from her husband, that he forbade her to work, and even to communicate with her parents without his knowledge, and also unjustifiably jealous, accused of cheating and constantly beat her. Upon hearing this, her friend was horrified and advised Nukhanova to leave the tyrant immediately. But she only started screaming in response and said that she did not ask for advice on what to do, but only wanted to talk. It should also be added that the couple, trying to save their marriage, turned for help to a family psychologist, who was supposed to help them in this. However, the husband rejected all the options chosen by the wife and insisted on his specialist, who at the sessions convinced Sultanat that only she was to blame for everything. In one of the last conversations with her brother, she told about her suspicions that the psychologist was hired by her husband specifically to once again humiliate and demoralize her. In the summer of 2023, Sultanat made an attempt to leave her husband and decided to move to the house of her parents for a while. But a week later, Kwandyk himself came to pick her up, urging her to give him another chance to save their marriage. Plus, he offered to move to his own house, and Sultanat decided that a change of scenery could be beneficial to their relationship. She also believed that the birth of a child together would change her husband's attitude towards her, but she could not get pregnant. The last family dinner. In October, Sultanat made a last attempt to leave her tyrant husband, and even moved to a rented apartment, which her brother helped her to find in a hurry. However, only 10 days later, she not only returned to her husband, but also went through the Muslim rite of marriage with him again in the mosque, nikah, about which she personally informed her family. On November 5th, she invited her parents, brother, and a few close friends to the Bao restaurant owned by Bishimbayev's cousin, Bakitjan Bayjanov. The family was celebrating the reunion of the couple, and the husband behaved very gallantly and courteously towards the chosen one, showed care, did not take his eyes off her in love, promised to protect her and carry her in his arms. That evening, everyone believed in the sincerity of his feelings and words, but the tragedy was only days away. Terrible news. On November 9th of the same year, Sultanat's brother came home from work and was minding his own business when suddenly there was a phone call, and his relative asked in a frightened voice whether what was being written on social networks was true. The man didn't understand what it was about and asked her to clarify what had happened. Then the woman sent him a link to a news item that said the former Minister of Economy had killed his young wife. Eitbek was discouraged by this news, but did not believe in the truthfulness of what was written. The day before, he had talked to his sister, and she once again said that she was going to leave her husband. Sultanat asked her brother if she could come to him for a sleepover, and he replied that she could do so at any time, indicating where the spare keys to the front door were. But neither that evening nor the next day did Sultanat come home, and her phone had been silent ever since. The man rushed to his sister's house, but there was no one there. Her husband was also not answering his phone, and the situation was quickly escalating. The decision was made instantly, to go to the family restaurant, from where Sultanat had last contacted, and look for answers there. While his brother was on the road, he received a call from his frightened parents, who had also read the news and tried to find out what had really happened. But his son could not answer them, and only promised to look into it. There were many policemen in the restaurant, who, having learned that Sultanat's relative had arrived, first of all began to express their condolences to him, noting that his sister could not be helped and died before the medics arrived. Kwandyk could not believe his ears. It seemed to him that all this was some monstrous mistake, but the terrible news was true, the testimony of the detainees. By the time the dead woman's brother arrived, Kwandyk had already been arrested and sent to the station as the main suspect. He categorically denied his guilt, wrote off what had happened as a horrible accident, and claimed that he was trying to help his wife. His brother and restaurant owner Bishimbayev was also taken into custody on suspicion of complicity. At the first stages, the suspect's lawyer insisted on the complete innocence of his client, noting that there was no evidence of his guilt. But, as it soon turned out, the evidence was promptly tried to destroy the ex-minister and his brother by deleting the recordings from the video cameras inside and outside the restaurant. But specialists managed to restore the video materials, and what was filmed there literally shocked everyone without exception. The investigation of this difficult case lasted almost 4 months, and all this time the main suspect insisted on his innocence, and he also behaved as if he was initially confident in impunity. At the same time, he was incriminated with the article "Murder with Particular Cruelty." It should be noted that forensic experts who examined the body of the deceased noted that for the first time they encountered such extensive and severe injuries. Some of them the woman received about 6-8 hours before her death. Therefore, she was beaten long and severely, leaving literally no living space on her face and body. But the suspect's lawyers tried in every possible way to minimize his guilt. He himself claimed that almost all the injuries of his wife caused herself because she was drunk, constantly falling, and banged her head on the tiles, on the toilet, and on the furniture, trying to reconstruct a picture of what happened. So it was found out that on that fateful evening, November 8th, 2023, the spouses, together with friends, went to the concert of singer Dima Bilan. There they strongly quarreled, but about the cause and nature of the quarrel friends could not say anything intelligible. The music was playing loudly in the hall, and they did not immediately realize that the couple was scandalizing, believing that they were just discussing something. But then the spouses suddenly left the hall, and left without saying anything to anyone. The couple went to the restaurant Bao, where they continued to quarrel, having closed themselves in one of the VIP cabins. The camera footage shows that the man took a few bottles of alcohol from the bar and retired to a booth with his wife. There, in the process of drinking wine and clarifying relations, the woman said that this could not go on, and she intended to leave her husband. Bishimbayev was enraged by this. He began to shout and threaten, and slapped Sultanat. After that, she called her brother, and said that she would come to his house for the night because she had finally decided to leave her husband. Around midnight, the young woman went outside, intending to go to her brother's house, but her husband caught up with her there and continued the scandal. The surveillance footage shows that they argued for about 15 minutes. But then the man managed to convince the spouse to go back into the building. For a few minutes, the couple still continued to quarrel in the vestibule, and then they again secluded themselves in a stall. Unfortunately, there were no cameras there, so we can only guess what was going on inside. The recordings from the camera located in the hallway show how Sultanat tried her best to get away from her husband, behaving calmly and keeping her distance, while he constantly tried to get closer to her, grabbed her hands, head, shook her, and pressed her against the wall. In court, the defendant's lawyer called these actions stroking. Sultanat, unable to escape, tried to hide from the tyrant and locked herself in the toilet. However, this did not stop the husband, and he began to literally kick the door, trying to get inside, as evidenced by the corresponding injuries. He forced the wife to open the door and immediately struck her several times in the face. He then reproached her and accused her of living at his expense, and that Kwandyk had bought her everything she had. It is difficult to judge what happened next. The defendant claimed that his wife got angry and in a fit of rage took off all her clothes and jewelry, which she then flushed down the toilet, to show that she did not need anything from him. According to another version, the man himself forced her to undress in order to humiliate her once again. After the gold jewelry went down the drain, Bishimbayev became furious and hit his wife several times in the face with his fist, and then pushed her so hard that she fell and hit the toilet. But at trial he claimed that the wife was drunk, and while undressing, fell several times herself, hitting her head on the tiles and plumbing. Then, according to the defendant, he and his wife intended to go home and left the restaurant, but he himself did not dare to drive, as he had drunk a lot of alcohol and did not want to call a cab to avoid shame, because he was ashamed of his drunken wife, who was in an unsightly state, in a coat over underwear. So they went back to the bow, still in the same stall. Soon the couple came out again and headed for the exit, but Sultanat stopped at the mirror, looking at her broken face. Then her husband began to forcefully push her towards the exit. Then the process turned into a banal beating of the unfortunate. The man mercilessly beat her with his hands and feet, dragged her by the hair, and about 7 o'clock in the morning, still by the hair, dragged her back to the VIP cabin. There the pervert actually finished his young wife, although at the trial he claimed that he did not touch her. Allegedly, she herself fell and hit the floor and furniture. Then Sultanat allegedly lay down on the sofa and fell asleep, and he noticed a bruise on her face and became concerned. But he did not call an ambulance, but a fortune-teller to make a reading and tell him if everything was all right with his wife. The fortune-teller assured him that the woman was drunk and needed to sleep, so Kwandyk calmed down and decided not to touch her. He claimed to have heard snoring, which he later found out was a death rattle. Toward noon, realizing that his wife was no longer breathing, the man called his brother Bishimbayev and asked him to come urgently. Together they disbanded the staff and closed the establishment to visitors, after which they began to delete the footage from all the CCTV cameras. Later at the trial, Bishimbayev claimed that he believed his brother that the woman was drunk and asleep, and agreed to delete the recordings, as they allegedly depicted Sultanat's indecent behavior, dishonoring her honor and the honor of her family. Bishimbayev called an ambulance only towards evening, when the woman's body was already cold and rigor mortis had begun. According to him, he tried to perform resuscitative actions, but they were useless. Sultanat had long since died. Law enforcers who arrived on the scene arrested both brothers. The opinion of Bishimbayev's former wife. While the investigation was going on, the former wife of the defendant and mother of his 3 children, Nazim Kakharman Babagulova, was also under scrutiny. Several years ago, when the ex-minister was arrested in a corruption case, she spoke in his defense, but almost immediately after he was released, she filed for divorce. The reason given was the standard irreconcilable differences, and she herself claimed to have outgrown that marriage. However, after the high-profile accusation of her ex-husband in the brutal murder of his new girlfriend, Nazim gave a frank interview in which she admitted that the man is really capable of such a crime. The woman said that they had been married for 14 years, but in 2011, after the birth of their second child, he became aggressive, selfish, and narcissistic, believing that the whole world should revolve around him, and his opinion is paramount. In addition, the man was constantly cheating on his wife, without hiding it. But it was only after Bishimbayev's arrest in 2017, when access to personal data in the former minister's phone was obtained, that his wife realized the extent of the cheating. According to her, her husband had several mistresses, and they were constantly changing. And after Kwandyk was released by the Pardon Commission, he became even more violent and aggressive. A month later, a quarrel broke out between the couple over some trifle, but the man instantly flew into a rage and threw a toilet lid at Nazim, which he ripped out with his bare hands. The woman managed to dodge, but it was at that moment that she realized that the marriage was over. In her opinion, Kwandyk held back his demons for so long because he realized that she would not tolerate it, but he allowed himself to humiliate and insult his mistresses, who could not resist him. In the case of Sultanat, Kaharman believes that the man initially chose his victim, tested the limits of her patience and submission, and when he realized that she would not go anywhere and would not complain, he showed her his true face of a sophisticated sadist. Why a jury trial? The trial began in March 2024, and it was immediately clear that the case would not be easy. The relatives of the murdered woman insisted that the trial be as open as possible, with journalists present, and the whole world could watch what was happening in the hall. They feared that the defendant would use his money and extensive connections to put pressure on witnesses and judges and try to avoid harsh punishment. In turn, Bishimbayev insisted on a jury trial, and his request was granted. 12 jurors were selected, 10 main jurors and 2 additional jurors, as well as the judge himself. All this was done with the sole purpose of avoiding the maximum penalty of life imprisonment. Previously, the ex-minister had already been convicted of a serious offense, but was released on parole, and a new particularly serious crime would have guaranteed him a life sentence. However, in the case of a jury trial, the criminal will only receive the capital punishment if all the jurors, plus the judge himself, vote in favor. The likelihood of that outcome is extremely slim, so the defendant clung to that possibility. Trial sessions. The defendant has repeatedly stated that he does not recognize himself guilty of premeditated murder with particular cruelty, insisting that everything happened accidentally, due to a tragic confluence of many factors. According to the man, the spouse herself provoked him, insulted, shouted, and threw herself into the fight. But numerous recordings from video surveillance cameras, which experts fortunately managed to recover, spoke to the contrary. Initially, they tried to incriminate Bishimbayev under the article domestic violence, which in Kazakhstan, thanks to the lenient legislation, does not entail serious punishment. But this aspect caused a wave of criticism and condemnation, especially from the relatives of the dead woman. Her mother tearfully stated in court that she was not even allowed to say goodbye to her daughter because the injuries were so horrible. But now her son-in-law can get off with a light punishment, which deprives her of faith in justice. Amid public outrage, a law was approved in April 2024 to toughen penalties for domestic violence in Kazakhstan. Kwandyk also tried to put serious pressure on his brother, accused of complicity, forcing him to give false testimony in order to get away with it. However, Bishimbayev asked the court to shield him from his relative, and his petition was granted. Each time during the sessions, Bishimbayev tried in every possible way to denigrate his late wife, calling her an inadequate, unbalanced alcoholic, who constantly cheated on him and provoked him to rudeness. He tried to convince the court that he had acted in a state of passion that night and had only hit his wife a couple of times, but those injuries were not fatal. All the other injuries were allegedly self-inflicted by her, constantly falling down under the influence of alcohol, and the livid marks on the woman's neck he wrote off to resuscitation measures and attempts to bring her to her senses, claiming that this was how he helped her. According to the second defendant in the case, the relative did not allow him to call medics to the dying woman and was only concerned about deleting the footage from all the cameras as quickly as possible. Kwandyk then ordered him to take his wife's cell phone to their home to simulate her movement around the city and to make it appear that she had returned to the apartment, because he knew that his brother was tracking her geolocation. During the 9th hearing, the defendant and his lawyer requested the recusal of the judge, Ayjan Kulbayeva, accusing her of lack of impartiality. However, the recusal was denied, and the judge continued to conduct the trial until the verdict. What was the verdict? Just recently, on May 13, 2024, Kwandyk Bishimbayev was found guilty of inflicting grievous bodily harm, torture, and murder of his common-law wife. He was sentenced to 20 years under the article murder, as well as 7 years for battery and torture. By partially adding up the terms, the man received 24 years in prison. a relative of the ex-minister, Bishimbayev, was sentenced to 4 years in prison for harboring. The court took into account the fact that earlier Bishimbayev had no problems with the law, sincerely repented and cooperated with the investigation in every possible way. Family members of the deceased Sultanat were dissatisfied with the court's decision. Her father, Sultanat Nukhanova, previously said that he hoped for a life sentence for his former son-in-law, and any other decision of the court would be unfair. At the same time, the brother of the murdered, Kwandyk, noted that 24 years in prison for 44-year-old Bishimbayev is practically a life sentence. Thanks for watching, guys. Subscribe to my channel. There are many shocking stories ahead of you. Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. Today, we're diving into another disturbing case. In November 2023, the former Minister of National Economy of Kazakhstan, 44-year-old Kwandyk Bishimbayev, committed a horrific act against his wife, 31-year-old Sultanat Nukhanova. He desperately tried to cover his tracks, attempting to disguise the brutal crime as nothing more than an unfortunate accident. But the case quickly drew massive public attention. The victim's family demanded a completely transparent trial, which has since been closely followed not only across Kazakhstan but also worldwide.